Hello, I'm Ann Rolfe. Welcome to our webinar, Advanced Mentoring Skills. Be slow to give advice. In fact, all the current advice on giving advice is don't. I don't say never give advice, but I do suggest you make it kind of a last resort. So it's all very well to say that, but let me back that up with 10 reasons why I say be slow to give advice. Then I'm going to go to, well, what do you do instead? If you're not going to jump in and give advice, what can you do instead? And then when it is appropriate that you give advice, how to do it really well. And yeah, the irony is not lost on me that in fact I am currently giving you advice, and I hope you'll forgive me for that and find it indeed useful to you. So it would be easy to argue that people who seek a mentor do so because they want advice. And while that may be true, giving advice is the least helpful thing you can do, at least straight away. Not giving advice is difficult to swallow because you're naturally action-oriented. You're possibly a manager, and maybe your work requires you to come up with solutions quickly, solve problems, and make decisions. If you're a manager, you're probably used to directing people and organising others, but mentoring takes a different approach. So it's not that mentors never give advice, but the best mentors make it their last resort. Now, I chose the turtle, the tortoise as a metaphor today because I guess we mostly know or remember the old story about the hare and the tortoise. The message being slow and steady wins the race. The hare takes off and takes the lead, as in jumping in with advice, whereas the tortoise is slower and plods along, but gets there in the end and is more effective. The other reason I chose the tortoise is because when a tortoise feels threatened, it pulls its head and its limbs in. I'm not sure if turtles can do that, but certainly tortoises can retract inside their shell. And as you'll see, as I share with you these 10 reasons for not giving advice, or at least not giving it too quickly, is that it can tend to make people defensive and therefore withdraw into their shells, which is not what we want in a mentoring situation. Now, there is a handout that summarises these 10 reasons I'm going to go into in a bit more detail now. And you can download that if you're watching live. If you're watching the recording, please email me and I'll send you a copy. So reason number one, sometimes people just want to vent and they don't want to, they don't necessarily want advice. Have you ever experienced, maybe you've had a tough day at work and you go home and you're telling, a family or a loved one, or maybe you meet a friend, a colleague for a beverage after work, and you just you trust them, you can say things in confidence, and therefore you get it off your chest. You're not looking for advice. All you want to do is literally get it off your chest, vent a little bit, share it with someone who understands that must go no further. Now, some people are really good listeners, but many people are not. And the minute you start saying something like that, they're going to jump in with, oh, why didn't you? Or why don't you? Or what you should have done? Or what I'd do in that situation. Remember a time when that happened? How did you feel? Sometimes that can just drive you mad. And if you can't remember a time when that happened, just look out, because I guarantee that will happen for you. Now, everybody needs to vent, to tell others about our experiences, whether it's good or bad, kind of let off steam, or that expression I used before, get it off your chest. But that doesn't mean we need solutions. People are not always seeking help. Sometimes we simply need to be heard. And need to be validated, to feel that what we're thinking and feeling is normal. Perhaps someone else feels the same way too. So that's just one of the 10 reasons. Reason number 2 is giving advice can imply that they're incompetent, and it can be very demotivating. Telling people what to do suggests they don't know or can't figure it out for themselves. Or they lack the capability to do something different that can get a better result. That's why it can feel insulting when someone starts giving unsolicited advice. It's different when you go to a doctor or a lawyer or a landscape gardener, because you're paying for expert advice. You're seeking that professional input and you're paying for it in a field you know less about. And that payment kind of balances out the relationship. And I'll say more about that balance in a relationship in a moment. Sometimes advice can be perceived as criticism and can lead to self-justification or resistance. Now, when you do give advice, it's because you want to help. You want the person to know what they can do or how they can change to get a better outcome, but it often backfires. And when we hear someone tell us we need to do something differently, we often subconsciously feel like we're being told we're wrong, we're bad, or we're stupid. And feeling judged like that, as I mentioned earlier, referencing the tortoise, it makes us defensive, and it's at the very least a barrier to communication, because judgment is one of the most threatening feelings there is, and it usually causes us to become defensive. What happens when we feel defensive is we instinctively respond with fight, so resistance, flight, sort of running away, backing away, or justifying, or that freeze, that deer in the headlights, that, if you've ever, sometimes when something happens and later on you go, oh, why didn't I say this? Why didn't I say that? Well, the reason you didn't is because your fight, flight, freeze reaction had kicked in, and unfortunately you were in freeze. You kind of couldn't think of the thing to say as the comeback to that. So be aware, this is a defensive reaction that is instinctive and natural and instantaneous, and it's not helpful when we want to communicate with people and build relationships. Now, here's something I hinted about earlier as well. Advice shifts the power dynamic in the relationship. In mentoring, we strive to have an open, balanced relationship. It's give and take. We're adults with neither exercising power over the other. In giving advice, one is taking control and actually gains a higher status. When one gives advice, it kind of raises the status of one and lowers the status of the other. And in lowered status comes lowered self-esteem, lowered self-confidence, and a lowered self-efficacy, that feeling and belief that we can achieve our goals, that we can overcome setbacks or master tasks. And I've mentioned to you before that the brain constantly scans unconsciously. The brain's looking for threats in the environment. It also unconsciously weighs our status in relation to other people. So again, this is part of that unconscious, instantaneous, instinctive defensive mechanism that is there and operating all the time. And we need to minimize defensiveness to build relationships and to have effective communication. Reason number 6, powering through these. You don't have all the information. You can't know all of the facts of a situation, let alone all the background, the thoughts, the feelings, the life experience of people involved. Your point of view is based on the information you have. and you don't have the full story, the entire story. In life, there are very few simple, clear-cut cause and effect type problems. Most have multiple interconnected variables. Number 7, people are unique. What works for you might not work for me or for the person you're mentoring. What you would or could do in a situation depends on a whole range of factors, but you're not them. They don't see the world the way you see it exactly. They have their own personality, their own knowledge and skills that differ from yours. Their needs and their values are not necessarily exactly the same as yours. Remember too, we mentor because we want to empower people to make their own choices that are right for them. We don't want to create a clone of ourselves, and we can't transplant, and we don't want to transplant our mind over the top of those. And reason number 8, advice robs them of the opportunity to learn and grow. One of the most important ways we develop is by figuring things out, thinking, what if, and considering options, possibilities, searching for information, deciding and planning for ourselves. If you give people short-term solutions, quick solutions, you short-circuit their problem-solving process. They miss out on the sense of mastery you get when you come up with your own solutions, your own answers. And coming up with your own solutions and your own answers and applying those is a process that actually strengthens you, and it makes you feel more confident, and it makes you more competent. I'll pause for questions in just a moment. We're nearly there. Reason number 9, you don't want to rush in with advice. Advice can build dependence and reduce self-responsibility. It's unhealthy when people don't have the opportunity to think for themselves, when they run to you for every question, or they need validation for their decisions. They remain tethered to you. They will feel little satisfaction with results, and they may blame you when things don't work out because they don't make the decisions. They won't take responsibility. They won't have ownership, and therefore there'll be little commitment. And now comes the bottom line. You're not the one who must face the consequences. We each must take responsibility for our own choices and actions. That's, in my opinion, is what being an adult means. We recognise that decisions have consequences. Behaviour produces results. Inaction has ramifications too. You can't dictate what they should do. They have to use their own best judgment because they have to live with the outcomes. So there you have it, and the 10 reasons are on your handout. I'll pop that in the chat box for you again now so that you can download that easily. There you go. And I'll pause and answer any questions. Love to see your comments. If you'd like to open your microphone and speak if you want, or if you'd like to type in. Okay, I'll come back and see if there's any questions or comments in just a moment. For now, my suggestion is I want to move on to the next area, which is, okay, what do you do if you don't give advice? But my suggestion is, and once again, I realise this is me giving advice to you, but I suggest talk less, listen more, and watch all of your relationships blossom. And so what do you do in it instead? Let them talk and feel heard. If someone comes to you with an issue, what you want to do is, and the way you do this, let them talk and feel heard, is with minimal responses. You know, the sort of the body language, the nodding, that show of attentiveness, genuinely in your face and the rest of your body, and even on video on Zoom and so forth, where they can see you, you can give very positive feedback that lets them know you are listening to them. So minimal responses. You want them to keep talking. Gentle probing, such as, can you tell me a little bit more about that? To get them to talk more. And reflective listening. This is where you kind of summarize and feed back to them. So what you're saying is, what I'm hearing is, and then paraphrase what they have been saying to you. Now, most of you have seen this model many times before in my webinars and in my books. This is the model of the framework of a mentoring conversation. And your first aim in a mentoring conversation is to have them reflect on their current reality. I'm looking at that. If we're looking at a clock face, it's from noon to 3 o'clock there. We're exploring their thoughts and feelings. We're trying to find out, our umbrella question here is, where are you now? And we're trying to get their perspective on the situation. And a person's perception, how they see the world and events in their life, is really shaped by those thoughts and feelings, their previous experience, and their imagination. So it's really important to find out what's going on for them. Now, I've put some sample questions on the handout for you as well. So your openings for any mentoring conversation can be something like, what's on your mind? And or your version of that, and you can type in your own version if you'd like to share with other people. We're trying to find out literally what's on their mind. Now, it's really important, don't rush them. And again, this goes back to many of us who are managers, where we've got time constraints, we've got pressures. What we want to do in mentoring is to take time out. It's allowing a good amount of time to pause, take a breath, to really listen to our mentee, to let them feel comfortable in the space that they can talk to us. So don't rush them, prompt them to talk, but don't rush them. Allow pauses and silences. You know, a lot of us are really uncomfortable with silence. We feel like we need to jump in and feel that silence. But if we can hold the silence for a little while, sometimes you can actually see the person is thinking. This is what I love about, even though you might be doing a lot of your mentoring online, but if you're doing it by video, you can see them, you can see their face, and you can often read that face. They're thinking about things. You can see their eye movements. You could see the expression on the face, the little sort of frown or query on their face. Allow the pause, allow the silence as much as you can without jumping in and filling it. And when you do ask questions, when you do prompt them to speak, let your attitude, let your mindset be respectfully curious. Let that come in your non-verbal, again, your body language, your own facial expression, but also your tone of voice, as well as the words that you say. So keep in mind that your job, especially at this very early phase, you're building rapport, you're building trust. So do not judge or critique what they are saying. You want to hear it, validate it, allow them to feel heard. Remember, at this stage, what you think is not really important. We're interested in getting out what they think. And it's about them bringing information up into conscious awareness. So we've got the conscious mind and we've got the unconscious mind. And regard their first things, so those early comments that they make, their first statements, as the tip of the iceberg. And you know that saying, and visually represented here on the slide. It's maybe only a tenth of it above the surface. There's so much going on below, and their emotions, their beliefs, their assumptions frequently lie below the surface in their subconscious. And these are drivers of behavior that they may even not be aware of. How could they? They are subconscious, unconscious, beneath the surface. If we can raise that to their consciousness, we are doing them a great service. And then we can enable them to examine those beliefs and assumptions, to feel their emotions, to be conscious and aware of those subtle drivers and influences. You can ask them questions like, and again, samples on the handout for you. And samples, I don't mean you have to use these samples. I'm reflecting my own learning style here. When you show me an example, I can use that and create something that works for me. So as I give you these samples, please regard them as that. I don't expect you to mouth these particular words, but to use them to add your own vocabulary, the words that are appropriate for you and the people that you mentor. So this phrase is it is a why question. If you've been with me before on these webinars, you know that we try to limit the use of the word why, because again, it's one of those words that can make people a bit defensive, start to justify. We want to know and understand why, but we might phrase it differently. What makes this important to you? What is it about that speaks to you? Whatever phraseology works for you and the person you are mentoring. And use reflective listening to summarize or paraphrase what you're hearing. There's likely several different values and beliefs at play for people. Some may even conflict with each other. For example, your mentee might have a really strong desire to do a good job. They, dare I say, might have a little bit of a perfectionist streak, and yet they're under pressure with deadlines and pressure from above. So they've got these conflicting values. On the one hand, do a really good job, get it perfect or as good as you can. On the other hand, time constraints and pressure. So you've got that conflict there. And so that's the conversation. They're the values we want to bring to the surface into their consciousness, so we can have a conversation where they decide which way to go or how to make a compromise that they can be more comfortable with. Now, when a person seeks mentoring, it's because they want to do something to improve their life. They may need to vent. They might have a lot of frustration they need to get off their chest. Indeed, they might want to express their unhappiness or lament their circumstances. And it is important that you allow them to do that, but you can't let them wallow in self-pity for too long. Sooner or later, you're going to lead the conversation towards what they want to do instead of the current situation, so that they can, what they want instead of the current situation, so that they can decide what to do. So this is very delicate. You are a trusted confidant to them. You are the safe place where they can vent, where they can express themselves, knowing that you will keep those confidences. And it's up to you to judge when that venting has come to its limit, and now it's time to move into something more constructive. We are not in the business of running pity parties. We don't want them to wallow in that self-pity. So you want to identify those preferred outcomes. So start to talk to them about what they would prefer the situation to look like or feel like or be like instead of what it is now. What are their goals? What are their preferred outcomes? Now, again, you don't want to shift gears too quickly. You are being empathetic and understanding and validating their feelings, up to a point, and you're now shifting gears. So you don't want to make it too sudden, like in a car. If you're in a manual car, if you've ever driven a manual car and crunched the gears, you feel how jarring that is. So don't shift gears too quickly. They need to have had enough time to really thoroughly articulate what's on their mind. But when you gauge the time is right, summarize the issue and follow up with a question. So clarify the issues. As I said earlier, life is complicated. Many factors and circumstances influence people's behaviour and their perceptions and the results they get. There's seldom a single cause and effect relationship. More often, it's a bunch of interactive elements that produce a situation that is the subject of your conversation. So you can ask some questions to explore these. And it might be questions such as, well, what do you think are the major influences on this situation? What else might be a factor? So you're drawing them out. You are eliciting their thoughts and feelings before you can then start to explore options and help them find viable alternatives that might achieve their preferred outcome. And you might even say something like, let's brainstorm some ideas about what you might do to change the situation. Now, this is an invitation to actually give them some input. If you're going to brainstorm, you're obviously going to get some ideas from them, but you can have some input there as well, make some suggestions there. A brainstorm is simply a list of alternatives that you then will have a conversation about so they can choose the ones that they think will work for them. You can have a discussion, and I like this traffic light formula that I've seen around the places for quite some time now, where you talk about things they could stop doing. So red light, things you can stop doing. Orange light, things they could do maybe a bit differently. Green light, something they could go to and do differently, start doing, that would help them move towards their desired situation. And you also talk about consequences of action and consequences of inaction. Remember, inaction has consequences too. So, put it to them. So what if you do nothing? What's the likely outcome if you do nothing? And it's not that you're advocating necessarily that they do nothing. What you're trying to do is make them think, oh, if I do nothing, things may go from bad to worse. If I say nothing, people think I agree with them. If I don't speak up, this behaviour that I don't like will continue and I'll feel more and more miserable. So it's worth having a discussion about the price of inaction as well as action. Once they decide on the best course of action for themselves, then you add value by getting commitment to their next step. Have them summarize their actions and a time frame for them. Get them to talk about the benefits, reasons for each planned step, and let them know that the two of you will review progress the next time you meet. Say something like, so what are the things you'll do before we next meet? Get them to commit to that. Okay, so let me put up a summary now, and then I'm going to pause to look at the questions and comments. So instead of giving advice, we elicit, we want to draw them out. We want to find out their thoughts and feelings about the situation. We want to raise their attitudes, their beliefs, their emotions from the unconscious to the conscious mind. We want to focus on their values and their needs regarding the situation, recognizing that their values are going to be different from our in some regards. Identify their goals or preferred outcomes for the situation. How would you like it to be? In an ideal world, what would this look like for you? Clarify the issues impacting on the situation. It's not generally a simple single cause and effect. There are often multiple factors going on, some of which may be able to be changed, some of which we may have to accept. Explore those options, possible alternatives that could achieve what they want. Discuss the actions they could take in terms of things to stop doing, what they might do differently, or things they could start doing that will get a different result, and get their commitment. So with that summary in mind, let me look for questions and comments now. Okay, Denise. What is the best way to introduce a relationship with goals set by the mentee? One of the benefits of being in an organised program is there's usually some pre-work where the mentee is asked to identify some goals. If that is not the case, then I think that it's a useful way to begin to just talk about your understanding of the mentoring relationship. Maybe you've also got some guidelines. Amongst those guidelines might be the direction of the mentoring relationship is determined by the mentee's goals. I do find a lot of mentees come into a mentoring program or a mentoring relationship with only quite vague goals, and that's perfectly fine. And so the first task of the mentoring conversation is to help them talk about what their goals might be. So what do you think you might get out of this mentoring relationship? You'll probably get some fairly broad or general responses to that. And you can then take it from the broad and general to the more specific. So if they say, well, I'd like to get more confidence, and you can say, okay, so tell me about what confidence means to you. Tell me what that looks like in your life or in your job. Or you can kind of have that conversation, and then you can go on with, okay, so over the next 12 months, what are some specific things that you think I might be able to assist you in achieving? So start with the broad and general. Be okay with the fact that a lot of people come into mentoring knowing it's somehow going to be good for them, but not necessarily having really specific ideas. Allow that. Allow it for your first meeting or two. If they haven't been given pre-work or homework by the program coordinators, you give them some, say, okay, I'd love it if you came up with an agenda for our next meeting, but on that agenda, I'd really like to have a conversation getting more specific about our goals for the 12 months or the 6 months or 9 months or whatever that period might be. Okay, thanks, Chantal. Thanks for your feedback. Lynn, hi. Yeah, so Lynn's talking about the extroverts process. So we've got, very broadly speaking, people who are more extroverted, people who speak and sometimes don't even know what they think until it comes out of their mouth, is what Lynn's pointing out. So they need more time to talk and process. And as a mentor, your skill is going to be in your reflective listening, kind of pulling out what you imagine are the key parts of that, reflecting those back to the mentee to allow them to clarify, because those first words out of their mouth, they're getting them out, so that helps them think, but there's a whole jumble of them. And the skill then is kind of this two-way conversation that literally allows them to clarify what's coming out of their mouth and get it down to its essence and the key things that you too will want to focus on. So thanks, Lynn, for bringing that up. On the other hand, of course, a lot of you are dealing with introverts, and I know a lot of you have spoken to me about this before, and there can be a cultural thing about if you have a higher status role in your organization than your mentee, they might want to be more passive, which is an introvert kind of characteristic. So your task is to work at drawing them out in the first place, because they're processing a lot of stuff internally that you want to draw out so that you can kind of have that conversation, and that can be a challenge. So lots of questions, lots of really good listening, lots of reflective listening and gentle probing. Okay, thanks, Denise, for the feedback. Thank you, Kalai. Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to move on now. And so we're talking about, and this is one of the hardest topics, the hardest concepts to get across, especially when you're training mentors who are managers and used to having to, time pressures and getting things done. And because mentoring is like taking the manager hat off and putting a completely different hat on. So we've covered the 10 reasons, and I hope that's been helpful to you. That's why I put them in the handout there for you. If you're watching the recording, email me and I'll send you the handout. I've talked briefly about some of the things to do instead of giving advice. And now I'm going to devote the rest of this webinar to talking about, okay, I accept, absolutely. People come to you for advice. Maybe they've identified you as a person with lots of experience, someone who's maybe where they want to be, or someone they aspire to be like. They're looking for your advice. I want to talk about when and where and how to do it well. So I want to remind you again of this original model of what I call the mentoring dynamic. So what this model says is the traditional view of mentoring, or a mentor is someone who shares their knowledge and experience, someone who imparts. That's kind of the foundation of traditional mentoring. And what I've been saying to you for a long, long time is that, yes, that is part of the mentor's role. However, before you ever get there, instead of impart, start out with elicit, drawing them out by asking questions and listening. A traditional aspect of mentoring too is support. And it's support where you encourage the individual to talk to you and you validate their thoughts and feelings. That doesn't necessarily mean you agree with all of them. It simply says, thoughts and feelings are theirs, and they're having them, and they're real. And what happens when you start building this rapport and this trust by asking questions and listening, encouraging and validating them, is you earn the right then to challenge their thinking, to provide a different perspective, to let them see that there are other ways of thinking about this. And indeed, yes, to impart and share your knowledge and experience. So this is where we're going now. This is an important aspect of mentoring. And it's where mentoring differs from some kinds of coaching and counseling, where in some coaching teachings, I know some of you have been to coaching training where you may have been taught you never give input. It's all got to come from the coachee. Well, I'm suggesting to you there's a mix of skills here, and there are times when people are looking for input, and there are times when it is perfectly legitimate to give them some input. So what we're trying to do is enable mentees to make informed decisions. And by definition, informed decisions mean they must have some information. So where do they get that information from? Well, there are basically three places. They can get that information from within themselves. And this is why I'm big on reflective listening. It's why I'm big on the pauses and the silences that allow them. It's why I'm big on asking them questions and asking them more questions, and the minimal response that shows them that you are trying to elicit. And that whole idea of the information coming from within themselves, information they're not necessarily immediately aware of because it's held in their unconscious, and we are trying to bring it up to their conscious mind so that they can see it and feel it and think about it consciously. So that's one. Two is external sources. So you can direct them, you can give them homework. Your job is not to come up with all the answers. You can suggest to them resources. They can go read stuff. They can go research. They can consult experts. They can look at data. Your job, if they're researching, is to teach them reliable sources. To teach them to get their information from legitimate sources, and teach them discrimination when they are obtaining resources. I'm sorry, I've got a pussycat who's come to visit here, who I'm hoping will not cause too much trouble on my keyboard. And the final source of information can be you. You can give them information, and it is, if it's appropriate, to do so. So they can ask about your own experience. You can share. Sorry, cat on the keyboard. Sorry for the distraction. So the time to share your knowledge and experience is when you've drawn out their knowledge and noticed some gaps. So a mentee is likely to have different experiences from you, and therefore they're seeking your knowledge and experience. There's a gap between what they know and what you know. So that might be an appropriate time. But remember those two other sources. You can send them off to do some research, bring it back and have a conversation about that. But you can give input when you notice the gaps. When you have relevant, important information, that will make a difference. And if it's appropriate to share something that they might not otherwise learn. And you have some choices to make too. If you're going to share some of your own experience, you might want to remind them that confidentiality works both ways. So if I'm going to tell you about a personal experience of mine, I have to be careful that you know I'm sharing this with you only because I feel it might be of benefit to you to take the lesson from someone else rather than learn it the hard way, if you like. But I expect it to go no further. You also have to guard the confidentiality of other people. So make sure you're not kind of naming other people if you are going to share information about yourself. So be careful about that, but it can be very useful. So when you are giving advice, remember the old adage, it's not just what you do, it's the way that you do it. So my suggestion is you ask permission before you just give this advice. Ask permission by saying something like, may I make a suggestion? Would you like me to share my observations? You know, I've got a different take on that. Are you open to hearing it? So those little phrases, and again, they're on the handout for you, make up your own, think of your own, have a repertoire, a toolkit, if you like, of your own phrases that you use before you give advice. May I make a suggestion? I've got some thoughts on that. Would you like to hear them? You know, I've had an experience similar to that. You know, would it help to hear what I did? I'm not saying this is what you should do, but, you know, make your own judgment. So first, when you're giving advice, ask permission. Second, own your own opinions, your beliefs, or your perspective. And you do this again with little prefacing phrases like, in my opinion, okay? We need to get clearer about the distinction between opinions and beliefs and facts. You know, you and I can have the same set of facts in front of us, but hold different beliefs. And there is no one who can say which is the ultimate truth. A belief, by definition, is a belief. We need to be respectful of that, and we need to own opinions and beliefs as such. That's my opinion anyway, and I try to live by it. So own your own opinion, your beliefs, and your perspectives. You can say, preface your comments with something like, I believe, I think, even I feel. Or you could say something, well, from my point of view. And this is all teaching, you know, this is teaching a mentee beyond the advice you're about to give. This is teaching them respectful, even disagreement. This is teaching them respectful conversation where people have different beliefs and opinions. And my goodness, couldn't we use more of that? And then when you're going to give advice, offer it, don't impose it. So pose it as options, alternatives, because what you want to do is empower them by enabling them to have choices. So you might say, well, one way to handle this might be, and I know this is tentative language, it's non-assertive language, but I would argue that it is empowering language. One way to handle this might be, it's a suggestion, you know, you're putting the power with them. It's one option. Or you might say, well, another tactic might be, or could be, or again, well, let's brainstorm some different ways to deal with this. So again, I'm using those words, may, could, might. This terminology implies possibility and alternatives rather than instruction. And what we know, we're trying to empower people, we're trying to motivate them. And a very good book by Daniel Pink, Drive, identified the three things that really motivate people is autonomy, that is being able to make their own choices, having a sense of purpose. Purpose comes from an individual's values. So you want to have those conversations with them about what is meaningful for them and what their purpose is and what their goals are. And mastery, being able to master life's lessons, master tasks, gain more skills and efficacy. So your conversations can be directed at these. So you'll empower them when you generate, you know, 2 or 3 options, and then your conversation is about them evaluating those options and choosing the way they choose the way forward. And finally, sorry, skipped a slide. You do want to have a conversation about possible consequences of their actions and, again, inaction before they decide what they'll do. Also set a time to review progress when they're going to come back to you, where they might confirm and continue their plan, or you might have to have a conversation about changing it or adjusting their actions. So that brings us to the end of the content I'm delivering today. We've talked about 10 reasons not to give advice, what to do instead, and when you do need to give advice, how to do it well. So I'm really keen to know what your key takeaways and actions are. I'm coming back to answer any more questions in just a moment. I'll be sending out to you this program for 2023. Can you believe it's coming around so quickly? I may be back in December with another webinar. I'm not quite sure. I'm having November off, taking a holiday. Today's webinar has come from my brand new book, Advanced Mentoring Skills. I'll be sending you some information about that book and where you can get it. It's available all over the world now in paperback and in ebook. And with that ebook, you also get access to 12 video masterclasses. So content based, shorter than webinar recordings. They go for 10, 15 minutes that you can actually view if you wish to. So keen to know your takeaways and respond to any questions now. Okay. Just looking at what's here in the chat box here. Okay, so Beatrice has a very valid question here. There is always that expectation that mentors should provide advice. So how do we frame this approach? I would suggest, and it goes back to an earlier question, right from the beginning of the relationship. Now, if you're in a program, mentoring program, hopefully there's some documentation about the role of the mentor and the role of the mentee that will help you. If there's not, I would suggest beginning a mentoring relationship with a conversation about the roles, about each of their roles. And I would be suggesting this sort of approach is the one you're going to adopt with the mentee. Let them know. Say, yep. Talk to them about, traditionally mentors were seen as people who gave advice, who shared their knowledge and experience, and I'm happy to do that. However, that's not going to be my first recourse. What we're going to do is have conversations. I believe my role is to empower you, to enable you to make good decisions for yourself. So I want to explore your goals, your plans, your challenges, and collaborate with you and explore them, and brainstorm some ideas and talk to you and come up together with possibilities so that then you can choose a way forward for yourself. I will certainly have some input if it's needed, happy to do that, but just know that it's not going to be the first thing that comes out of my mouth. And you'll have to reiterate this message again and again with some mentees. Others will take it and they will run with it and they will love it right from the beginning. Love to hear some feedback on that from other people on our webinar today. Okay, Jeff is saying, oh, wait a minute, I think I missed one here. Let me go to my mouse doesn't want to play with me today. Okay. Okay, Lynn is saying, love the way you provide advice after you've drawn everything out. Thanks, Lynn. That's great. Jeff is saying, key takeaway for me is to try not to give advice, and that is also my action, to use other responses to elicit what is happening. Okay, and Denise, this is a great seminar for training mentors in our program. Okay, fantastic, Denise, thank you. And Beatrice, key takeaway is the options of providing advice. Thanks, Beatrice. Okay, Sally, key takeaway, using frameworks and guides. Mentoring skills are an excellent way to develop managers, leaders. Okay, thank you, Sally. Yes, and I agree. The mentoring skills are key to leaders and managers' repertoires today. More and more mentoring is being built into the role description of managers and leaders. And employees, subordinates expect that kind of approach much more from their leaders and their managers. Okay, stick around if you've still got questions. I'm going to stick around. I'm just going to stop the recording now, and I will stick around for more questions and comments and conversation with you. If you're watching the recording, thanks for being with us, and do email me if you want that handout